Hello, I'm Grandmaster Alexandra Kosteniuk. I'm the 12th Women's World Chess Champion. I will show you today my game against Nadezhda Kosintseva from the first ACP Women's World Rapid Chess Cup, which took place in Konya, Turkey, in December 2009. The top 8 ladies of the ACP Women's Series took part in this prestigious event. I started the game with Nadezhda, as usual, with e4. The game continued e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, which is my favorite Ruy Lopez opening. a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castle, b5, bishop b3, and here Nadezhda chose to play the Archangelsk variation of the Ruy Lopez, which starts with the move bishop c5. It's funny that the Kosintseva sisters actually live in Archangelsk, so this seems quite appropriate. Most popular reply here for black instead of bishop c5 is bishop e7. After bishop c5, the game continued with c3, d6, d4, bishop b6, a4, threatening to take the pawn on b5. That's why the 3 common moves here for black are bishop b7, bishop g4, or rook b8, which was made by Nadezhda in our game. After rook b8, I played a5, which is not the most popular reply for white, but it's very interesting. Since if black takes the pawn on a5 here by playing knight takes a5, white has a very interesting idea of sacrificing the exchange by playing rook takes a5 and then winning the pawn on e5 and getting a very strong compensation. That's why normally black plays here bishop a7. White plays h3 in order to avoid the move bishop g4, pinning the knight on f3, castle, bishop e3. This is all well-known theory. Here Nadezhda opted for a rather rare move, rook a8. In the recent World Blitz Championship in Moscow, in my game against Vishwanathan Anand, he opted here for another continuation, which is knight takes e4, which leads to interesting and complicated play. After rook a8, in my game against Nadezhda Kosintseva, I played knight b to d2, and black played bishop b7. I moved my rook to e1. Black played here rook e8 without adding the move h6. The idea of rook e8 is to stop the classical knight maneuver, knight d2 to f1 to g3, since now after knight f1, the pawn on e4 will be hanging after e takes d4. On the other hand, since it's more typical for black to include the move h6 before playing rook e8 in order to prevent the bishop on e3 or the knight on f3 to move to g5, I decided to use the fact that black didn't include this move, and without thinking for a long time, since after all it was just a 20-minute rapid game, I played knight g5. Nadezhda played rook f8. After rook e7, instead of rook f8, I would most likely play d5, knight b8, knight f1 with a better game for white. After rook f8, of course, I didn't want to just go back with my knight by playing knight g to f3, and I think I found a very strong move, which is knight f1. The idea of this move is, again, since after h6, knight f3, the pawn on e4 is untouchable. But Nadezhda didn't play h6, which would have been a normal move here for black. Instead, she opted for knight e7, which is a mistake because after d takes e5, it turns out that black cannot take on e5, d takes e5, because I will just take the queen on d8, queen takes d8, and both black rooks are protecting her own pieces. So the rook on a8 is protecting the bishop on a7. That's why black cannot take rook a takes d8, since I will just take the bishop on a7. And the rook on f8 is protecting the pawn on f7, which is also very important in this position. Thus, the move d takes e5 is impossible. And the only move that black can make here is bishop takes e3. This is the key moment of the game. When I was making my 17th move, I was planning to play here knight takes f7, with the idea after rook takes f7 to continue the game with bishop takes f7 check, king takes f7, e takes f6, attacking two pieces at the same time, and black cannot protect both in one move, thus I will win one of them and will end up with the extra exchange. That's what actually happened in my game with Nadezhda, but the problem with knight takes f7 is that black has a very strong intermediate reply, which is not very obvious, but I managed to notice it. It starts with bishop takes f2, and after king takes f2, another very strong move, knight takes e4 check. The game can continue after knight takes e4 with king g1, rook takes f7, bishop takes f7, king takes f7, queen f3, king g8, rook takes e4, d takes e5, rook d1, queen e8, queen d3, bishop takes e4, queen takes e4, rook d8. We reach an approximately even endgame. Of course, I didn't see the whole variation during the game, but I noticed these two strong moves, which is bishop takes f2 check and then knight takes e4. And that was not exactly what I was hoping for. Of course, I knew that instead of knight takes f7, I could just play knight takes e3, and after d takes e5, play queen f3 with a better position. But I had this strange feeling that there is something more in this position. That's why I spent even more time, and I found the correct solution, which is bishop takes f7 check. King h8 doesn't help in view of knight takes e3, d takes e5, queen takes d8, and black can't avoid losing material, since after rook a8 takes d8 I will play knight e6, a fork, and after rook f8 takes d8 I will play bishop a2, with the deadly threat of playing a knight f7 check. That's why in the game black played rook takes f7, knight takes f7, and here, even though black tried this move, bishop takes f2, it doesn't help, since I just take the bishop on f2, and after knight takes e4, I will just take the knight on e4, and the queen on d8 will be still hanging. That's why black tried to play queen f8. This is probably a little bit better than king takes f7, since I will just take on f6 anyway. And here the idea of black after e takes f6 to take with the queen on f7. But I found a good move, which is knight h6 check, with the idea to weaken the opponent's pawn structure. Black took on h6, e takes f6, queen takes f6 check, king g1, knight g6, knight e3. The rest is simple, since white is an exchange up and black cannot get any serious counterplay. Rook e8, knight d5, queen e5, queen d4. Exchanges always favor the side with more material. c5, queen takes e5, rook takes e5, rook a to d1, king g7, knight e3. It's impossible for black to protect the pawn on d6, since after rook to e6 I can just take on d6, rook takes d6, rook takes d6, and then knight f5 check. That's why black took on e4, but after rook takes d6, black resigned, since the pawn on a6 will be lost and the game will be over soon. I won this tournament with the result of 10 points out of 11, which is a performance over 2,700. The second was Victoria Chmelita with 8 points out of 11, and the third place went to Nadezhda Kosintseva.